Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's on coffee number 2. Dan Carroll had us start at 8 a.m., which is criminal. So I'm Rachel Halfaker. I'm a director at the Milken Institute, and I lead the 10,000 Communities Initiative. I am incredibly excited about this conversation with this brain trust on this stage right now. And to set the stage a little bit before we dive in, I just wanted to kind of sketch out what we hope to accomplish in the next 30 minutes. So about 5 years ago, our team started looking at the problem of community-scale infrastructure deployment and really the lack of support for community-scale infrastructure deployment. And we were looking at essential infrastructure from housing to broadband to water to energy efficiency and resiliency. And we were wondering, what is the real constraint preventing the deployment of resources to get these projects built, and why do we have such a deficit in this space? And we heard the projects are too small, the communities are not sophisticated enough, the developer appetite is not there, and there's no market for it. And we, in response, said that is not acceptable. This is really important work, and we can get some really smart folks together. So we built the Community Infrastructure Center. We support 1,300 organizations across the country. They have over 300 projects. And we match capital to communities, technical assistance, support services all day long. What we have learned is that the projects are very small and the communities are very constrained, and it is tough work. But there are also enormous opportunities for us to grow this market. That's what we're going to talk about. This is a solvable problem, and so I really want to highlight some of the different perspectives of what those solutions are. So Tony, let's start with you. At Brookings, you've got a really interesting macro perspective on the challenge of deployment at the rural level. So talk to us a little bit about what your observations are from the challenges to the opportunities that you see.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. And actually, thanks for this panel and for your initiative and bringing actual focus and attention to this particular issue. So I lead an initiative that's focused on community economic development in rural places. And so over the past several years, we've been looking at what works and what defines success. In fact, we've been capturing some of those in our podcast, Reimagine Rural, shameless promotion, find it anywhere you listen. And I would say 3 different things. One, the appetite for investment is huge for infrastructure. So you look at the Department of Energy, which ran 2 rounds of energy improvements in rural and remote areas. You had over 1,100 applications for what amounted to 40 grants. And when you look at the new Recompete pilot program that the Economic Development Administration put together, about 50% of those distressed local labor markets and jurisdictions that were eligible, over 50% were rural, and they had 585 applications, the most ever in EDA's history, for a program where you had like 6 grants. So the appetite is out there. Rural communities are looking for investment for infrastructure and economic opportunity. And the trick is, and this is the second point, is that often to make it work, you need a lot of different kinds of capital, right? You need a capital stack, let's say. It's going to be both public and private, sometimes philanthropic, different kinds of incentives, because it's really hard for the market to make those projects that you were talking about work in small areas or in areas that are having to renew themselves or revitalize themselves. But that leads to some of the third point I want to make, which you alluded to, is that there are constraints on capacity at the local level. There's not constraints on creativity or vision for what communities want to accomplish. But you've got volunteer elected officials, you've got thinly staffed city halls. Sometimes you have actually not great access to financial institutions or capital. And it's difficult to get access to the expertise. And so it requires partnership. It requires partnership that are sometimes public-private. It might be with a Philanthropy or a CDFI or others. Sometimes it's partnership across rural jurisdictions. That can be difficult. There's no real governance structures for that to occur. And sometimes it's partnership rural to urban, right? Which even creates a larger consortia and coalition challenge. But the appetite is there and the opportunity is there. And I think it's just a matter of how do we put this together to be able to make it work.
Yeah, great. And I think that piece of philanthropic capital tees us up very nicely. So there's a lot of conversation around federal sources of funds. There are philanthropic sources of funds. There's private capital. Making sense of that is very hard. Organizing that space is essential. So Jane, talk to us about what you're working on in Kentucky, how you're doing this at the state level and through a philanthropic lens.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel. So what we do at Craft Philanthropy, and my name is Jane Brady Knight, I'm Executive Director of Craft Philanthropy, which is a family foundation in central Kentucky. But we really focus on our rural communities because they're so essential to our state's economy. And yes, we do look at it from a rural economic perspective, but it's all community driven. And we do that through public-private partnerships because we believe that the entire community, including state, local, federal government, is needed to make sure that these communities thrive. So what we do is we work with anyone from just individuals when it comes to housing. We go through community foundations. They help us to deploy assets out to those specific organizations and/or individuals and/or family farms to help them get up off their feet, especially after flooding in the areas or natural disasters. We also work with our high schools and community colleges. So, for example, what we have is a craft academy out in Eastern Kentucky, and it's really there to serve a very high-skilled, underserved community of students who go to a residential program at Morehead State University. It's usually their first time leaving home. They are juniors and seniors in high school, and it's only in its 8th or 9th year. I believe it's 9th year, 9th graduating class, and it's now the 6th best STEM program in the US, beating out some of the best boarding schools. And we partner with our state government. And so it's just Craft Philanthropy, state government. It's fully funded for the students. And then once they graduate, we have a scholarship program. So we've sent students off to MIT, to Harvard. They go to Huntsville as well. So these students are going off, but they are incentivized to come back through both also state and private funding for them to be a part of internships, to be a part of different type of corporate fellowships, to really invest back into our state's economy. But it's a huge opportunity to give that region a chance to grow and also have this next generation invest. And as Tony mentioned, we're also partners in this Recompete grant. So our organization out in Eastern Kentucky, Shaping Our Appalachia Region, applied for the grant, and they were the largest recipient of $42 million. So Craft Philanthropy is the private sponsor of that grant as well. And we are serving as an accountability partner because we understand that no matter what, it needs an entire community initiative and all the resources that we can deploy out into that region to get 34 to 35,000 people into the workforce. And it's essential for that community to grow now and for industries to be attracted to that community in order to diversify the job market, but as well make it attractive for generations to stay there. And that's what really counts when it comes to building a community. And that's what we see this Recompete grant and what we call our Eastern Kentucky Runway Initiative. That's how we see it being successful, is if we can measure how many people not only get into the workforce, but how many families are built there and stay there and establish themselves and really revamp Main Street.
Awesome. So we've got a state perspective, we've got a pool of capital, we're organizing it. We still have the question, these projects are too small, what do you want me to do with this? And so one of our 1,300 organizations is RE-volv. Andreas, you've got an incredible story, and no project is too small for you, and you think a lot about how to build a portfolio of these assets. So talk to us about your work, what you've seen, and what you're most excited about when you hear that comment.
Awesome, thank you, Rachel, and thanks for having us here and putting this great panel together. My name is Andreas Karelas. I'm the founder and executive director of RE-volv. We are a nonprofit organization that develops and finances solar projects for fellow nonprofits across the country. So think schools, churches, homeless shelters, health clinics, VFWs, food banks, any community serving nonprofit organization that benefits their community. And we've been doing this work since 2011. We've helped over 80 nonprofits in 18 states go solar, have deployed over $20 million into these types of projects. And historically, this sector had a really hard time getting financing for their projects. As you mentioned, these projects are too small. They're often deemed to be high credit risk. And historically, nonprofits were unable to take advantage of the solar investment tax credit, which now, thanks to direct pay in the Inflation Reduction Act, that's now been taken care of. So now these nonprofits can get a direct check from Treasury for their tax credits. So that solves the biggest barrier. But the other two barriers around the size and the credit risk still remain. So what RE-volv has done, as Tony alluded to, we've put together a capital stack that does include foundation, philanthropic support in the form of program-related investments, loan guarantees, and then combine that with mission-aligned investors to make these projects work. And we've also had to, because nonprofits don't have a credit score, a FICO score, for example, it's difficult for them to demonstrate their creditworthiness. So we've had to develop our own internal financial health scorecard. And I'm happy to say that we've been doing this work for 15 years, and we've had a nearly 100% repayment rate to date. And so the point to underscore here is, and there are much bigger companies than RE-volv that can demonstrate this as well, that in underserved, underinvested communities, low income, low wealth families and community centers are paying their electric bills first. So this is an investable asset class, and we need to generally think of this less as a risk. And then on the project size, we talk about portfolio approach, and so that's what is really exciting about the Milken Center's Community Infrastructure Center and the Banyan infrastructure platform is that it allows developers and investors to align on your credit box, your strike zone. These are the types of projects that we're willing to fund as a portfolio. And then what are those standardized contracts that are going to apply to all the projects in the portfolio? And once you're able to align on that, then you can invest, you can accelerate the amount of investments that go into those deals. So that's been really helpful for us as well. The last thing I'll say, the other big opportunity here, to pick up on the senators on the last panel, is around CDFIs, credit unions, nonprofit loan funds, community-based investors. These organizations have a long history of understanding how to do due diligence and underwriting for underinvested communities, but they might not have as much experience in the clean energy asset class. So the opportunity now to participate with groups that have clean energy experience so that they can update their due diligence to apply to clean energy assets is going to really allow for capital to start flowing into the space.
Awesome. So we've got the bundle. Amanda, how do we get it to the capital markets? What does this look like to standardize this and help this growing asset class mature so it's more attractive?
Yeah, exactly. I think very excited here because I think we're across the panel here, we're tackling sort of all the key components all the way for small scale infrastructure to reach those capital markets. And it's a few layers of friction, right? It's both on the capacity side and also on the liquidity side. You sort of have to tackle both. On the capacity side, there's a reason why large-scale infrastructure investors often can't write a check below $100 million. It's because there's a lot of overhead around it. I used to be an infrastructure investor myself, right? And it's every single deal, you have models for cash flows, performance, you have contracts, you have counterparties, and that's the same for a $100 million investment, as a $10 million investment, as a $1 million investment, as $100,000. But guess what? The $100,000 investment does not have a lot of overhead to support an army of analysts digging through a giant pile of spreadsheets and PDFs. So really crippling around that side of it. That's where, with Banyan, the first mission we're trying to tackle is to create more of that capacity by automating a lot of it. We're a software platform. We help with the origination, underwriting, portfolio management, and compliance of these assets with amazing banks, lenders, developers like RE-volv and Andreas here. And so what we want to do is make it cheaper, faster, more profitable, less risky for investors to come into this asset class. And then when you do that, you can actually start to solve the second problem here, which is liquidity. If we think about these local investors that are, have the relationships with their local communities, are able to have experience underwriting and working with, multifamily, small businesses, the CDFI, MDIs, community lenders Andreas referred to, they often only have maybe 10, 50, $100 million on balance sheet. And their communities need far more than that amount of capital in infrastructure to truly create savings, create wealth. And we know that the larger banks are going to come in and write these small checks. So what the important question is, how do we get that capital they have off their balance sheets, recycle some of it, move it and sell it or securitize it to broader, larger institutions on Wall Street that hold large pools of capital? And traditionally, the problems around that have been standardization, right, where every single contract or project looks a little bit different, as well as just visibility. Because even if you do start to standardize, you have similar contracts, someone else is saying there, you're a small lender and you're like, I have a great portfolio here. Larger banks are maybe, and funders are maybe a little bit suspicious. They don't want to do that arduous task of looking into it. They don't have the visibility to say, is it really standardized around that pool? But if you digitize these assets, right, if you start to be on platforms like the CIC and Banyan, you really start to have pools of information. So you could say, hey, what are those projects out there? What are the credit boxes they score into? Maybe even cross developers or cross banks, where you can look across multiple states, multiple developers to say, I want exposure to C&I solar or energy efficiency or a transportation asset, and I need $100 of it with this particular credit box. There are those profitable projects, I guarantee you today, already existing that don't even need credit enhancements, but banks can't go find them. So what we want to do is make it easy for them to understand what is possible to invest in, be able to then easily come in and invest in them. And then we can mobilize that capital, bring more money into the community. And then final point is, even for those that need credit enhancements, we know that that is the case still, right? Some investments may not be at the level that Wall Street needs. If we have visibility, we understand how to build that capital stack that Tony was mentioning right? We need to be able to size and price what the level of risk is that a larger institution can't bear, and therefore can more directly point to philanthropy and government entities. This is the area you need to come in with, and then we can mobilize this capital and invest in this large pool of assets.
So I'm going off script here, team. So look alive here. Anyone catch this potato? So we have a lot of capital providers in this room, and they are CDFIs, they are philanthropy, they are institutional investors, they are consortia of lenders, and these are really promising opportunities that we've sketched out. And yet, we will leave this room, and we will not see a rush to deploy the capital in the way that we all would like to see it. So talk to us about, anyone, please, why is it so hard for the capital providers to come along? What would you communicate is needed by those capital providers to help make this a long-term, sustained market?
Patience. It's not, receiving this recompete grant has been huge for our region, and it's given a lot of hope. And it's a 4 to 5 year project from just looking at the paper, what's on paper, but it's 20 years. And that requires accountability partners. That's how we see ourselves. We see ourselves as incentive partners, and we see ourselves as accountability partners, because we want to make sure that these communities are actually going to see the result of this investment from our federal government and from private dollars and from microfinancing as well throughout the community, because they deserve to. I mean, for us, our whole mission revolves around the American dream, and it's not just the American dream of marriage, kids, white picket fence. It's earned success. It's making your life whatever you want it to be, and in that region, they have learned to live, and when I say they, I just mean Kentuckians generally, and what we experience in our state is it's called the draw. It's a way of life. And so what you have to do now is really understand you are not just bringing in money for to incentivize people to help change their lives or bring in jobs or revamp education. You are trying to change a way of thinking about how you live your life, changing from learned helplessness to agency and giving folks another chance at creating something great for themselves. That's harder than building a semiconductor. And that's really intimidating when you're talking about bringing money and capital into a region, when you're saying, yeah, we're going to change belief systems.
Right. It'll take you 20 years, but it'll be worth it in the end.
It'll be worth it in the end.
Yeah. Tony.
I would add on to what Jane is saying in terms of patience. We need a bridging infrastructure, right? You actually have you have 3 examples here of that bridging infrastructure. for example, think about trust. How do large capital providers think about trust? Well, they're going to calculate and look at how they're managing risk. But how trust actually works at the local level in rural places is relational, right? And so who can help bridge between the way in which a large capital provider is thinking about trust and the local community and local leaders are thinking about trust? And it is going to be an infrastructure that can talk to both sides and be able to create a way to make it work on both sides. Because you also have to right-size the capital, right? Amanda just both talked about how it's very hard for lots of little projects. That just seems really hard for a large capital provider. But for a local community, they're not going to need $100 million, right? That's not what they need. They need something on the terms, both the size and on the terms that make sense to them. So I think we need a lot more bridging infrastructure that you actually have examples of here that can be able to be in the middle and understand the interests and the accountabilities on both sides and be able to make that work.
Absolutely.
I'll add in that I think we've spoken to so many large-scale capital providers, also small-scale capital providers as well, and everyone believes in that bridge. But what I'd call for is really to lean in on it, right? Everyone is so excited. I say, hey, do you want some benchmarks? Are you willing to say, hey, let's understand what standards are and be able to create easy understanding of like what the norms and standards to drive a virtuous cycle of enough of a market to make one? And everyone says yes, right? 100% of people we have talked about this idea are super excited about it. And then you say, okay, well, can you lean in, right? Can you share what you're doing, right? Can you give us your interest of what your credit box is? And they're like, oh, no. I mean, let's hide that, right? This is our super secret sauce here. And so it's really hard. It really much feels like sometimes, herding cats, right? Where everyone wants in. They want that bridge because they see impact, they see profitability to be gained from having that bridge. But we all need to sort of shuffle to it together. And so any of you capital providers in the audience, right, if you are able to lean in, take a little of a step forward, share some of your insights, partner with many of us on the stage, we need to take those steps because everyone is looking to everyone else to take those steps. And we have people here leading it, but we really need all of you to lead it as well.
I'm so selfishly going to answer my own question because we are of the same mind. So my call is on this point. We have been indexing products left, right, and center. We've got 100 products named. Is it a bridge? Is it perm? Is it for long-term kind of O&M coverage? I want to know who is the right borrower, what's the right qualification of the project, what is your rate? And I heard from a lender, we could do 5 to 15%. And I was like, that's not a range that I can work with. Those are 5 different products that you just put into one term. So tell me your terms and break down the products, and we will work on stitching it together, but we do have to start there. Okay, you have to make a call because you're the one looking for capital, so. Sorry.
Yeah,
he would like to raise for anyone in the room.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I think I would really just to pick up on Tony's bit about trust. We work at the community level with community-based nonprofits for the reason that people in those communities trust those institutions. And there was a great study that came out last year from Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and it found that for every non-residential solar installation that includes nonprofits and houses of worship, that you'll see on average about 80 residential follow-on installations in that community within the next 5 years. So for those of you that are doing, sort of residential lending, working with homeowners, right? Like that community institution being the leader in developing and sort of showcasing clean energy is going to then drive demand for clean energy at the local level. And again, the call for the community-based lenders out there is, if you're doing affordable housing or you're doing small business lending, if you haven't thought about clean energy as a part of your portfolio that you invest in already, now's the time to do so. You heard Jigar Shah this morning mention that 90% of what's now being invested in energy generation is clean, but are underinvested communities being a part of that? Are low-income communities and families going to be a part of that? So that's really the mission focus that we need to be working on, making sure that clean energy and the lower electricity costs that come from that and the job creation that comes from that and the resilient power that comes from that is really going to be available to those that have traditionally been left out.
Awesome. Okay, back on track. So to close us out here, what happens if we get all of this right? Tony, we'll start with you.
And Jane even mentioned this. I think it's both a renaissance in smaller and rural towns across the US, and I think that also means real growth and competitiveness for the US as an economy. One thing to keep in mind is that rural is not an afterthought to the US economy. It is where we get our food, our energy, our fiber. It's where people go to relax and recreate. It is interdependent with the places that we think of in the knowledge economy in cities. And so we invest in it for our sake as a country, not for those local communities.
Yeah. Amanda?
I think what we get scale and we get resiliency, because this is a market that is permanent because it's profitable, right? And it is something that's an asset class where we're not just talking about at this stage, but people are talking about it at the structured finance conferences. They're talking about it on Wall Street. We don't have to rely on people who care to come in here, because intrinsic greed will drive it, right? There's money to be made here. And so when Andreas does some deals, right, there are a ton of banks out there looking to buy them, or he can easily securitize them. And it doesn't matter whether governments come and go, philanthropy comes and goes, right? As much as we need capital stacking today, right? In the future, we can see a world where potentially that is less needed, because it is just a type of investment that drives huge volumes, and we're creating wealth at all levels.
Awesome. Jane?
I think it's about changing the narrative, and you do that through action. But what we've really seen out in Eastern Kentucky, and where we focus on in those rural communities, is, there's been a narrative for so long in the U.S. I mean, since Lyndon B. Johnson came out there about 61 years ago to declare the war on poverty, that it is the place of poverty. It is toothless, shoeless, unintelligent. Not where you want to go to get a job, not where you want to raise a family. We want to reverse all of that. And Eastern Kentucky specifically is where Daniel Boone first discovered the American dream westward, right? As the first part of America that is the expansion west. So it is the true definition of the American dream, and these people are pioneers. And we're now seeing this next generation of pioneers. And I want it to no longer be a place where you have to be a pioneer. I want it to be a place where it's a community and it's thriving.
Wonderful. Andreas?
Yeah, I think, just for the folks in the room that are, community-based lenders that are looking to get it, or larger financial institutions that are looking to get into this space, participate in deals. There are lots of clean energy developers out there that have been doing this for a long time, that have figured out how to underwrite these projects, and they can share their due diligence process with you through participation. And as the Main Street lenders start to become familiar and comfortable with the asset class, that's where what we hope to arrive at is that every church, school, VFW, community center can go to their local lender and get a solar loan, a solar and storage loan the same way. It's as easy as getting a car loan. That's where we want to get to, hopefully, in the next few years.
Awesome. We could do it. We've got it. So let's make it happen. Thank you so much to this wonderful panel and this great discussion. Appreciate it.